All right, hey everybody. So today we're going to be changing the valve cover gasket on our Mercedes-Benz engines. And so one thing that I like to do, especially when rubber has kind of been packaged like this, is I'll put it in some warm water and that'll just loosen everything up. But if your valve cover gasket comes on cardboard, then you should be fine. So, all right, on to the next. Let's go ahead and remove our engine cover. And if you want to see a video on that, then I'll put a link for that. Next, we're going to want to put a glove over that air intake just so that no dirt gets in there. Next, we're going to be using some kind of blower, or you can use a brush, but I'm using a blower just to clean out all the dust and dirt that's going to be sitting on top of your valve cover and engine. Next, we'll just go ahead and remove the spark plugs and the coils. If you haven't seen a tutorial on that, I'll put a link in the description for that as well. Now we're going to just take some paper and some degreaser and just clean up a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and remove that hose right there that connects to the valve cover. For this hose, I'm using some hose pliers, but you can use something like a hard plastic. Now we're gonna remove the valve cover bolts, and you want to make sure you get all of them. There are some that are kind of sitting really close to the firewall, and then one kind of like final thing is we're just going to go ahead and brush just to make sure we get as much dirt off of the valve cover as possible. Now with these valve covers, they are made out of magnesium, not aluminum, so they can crack or chip depending on what tool you use to remove them. So for here, I'm demonstrating using hard plastic pry tools, and they can help. Here I'm using a dead blow hammer just to kind of shock the valve cover a little bit, but I'm using very light taps. If this is something you're uncomfortable with, then please do not use a dead blow hammer. Now this crowbar is made out of metal, and it is one of the tools that I've always used, and I'm really good at using it, so I know just how much pressure to use with it. And as you can see, I was able to get it loose. So if you have any kind of like maybe something made out of wood or hard plastic, I would recommend that. All right, as you can see here, I'm just trying to get as much of the dirt off as possible, and I'm being very careful, very gentle, making sure to also get the valve cover gasket, just because it's been heat cycled so many times, it's kind of made it to the surface. So I want to make sure that I get the valve cover gasket and also prevent any more dirt from getting into the engine, because that's the last thing that we want. And when these kind of V-style engines, or should I say these V-style engines are, they kind of have the tendency to pick up dirt in crevices, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast here. So as you can see, I'm just taking my time, being very gentle, and we have now successfully removed the valve cover from the engine. So you can see all the sludge buildup and all that kind of stuff that you hear about in the oil commercials. So yes, sludge is a thing. Now you can see here I'm just getting some dirt that I caught before it really kind of fell into the engine. You will see some pools of oil, and take a look into those pools to make sure that there isn't any dirt, and if you do find dirt, try to scoop it up very gently. Okay, so here you can see I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad to remove any kind of leftover markings from the valve cover gasket. And so then after that, I'm using a microfiber towel just to get any leftover residue from the Scotch-Brite pad, so that we have a super clean surface. And then after that, put some type of plastic protection over it or some type of covering over the engine, because now we're going to move on to cleaning the valve cover. Okay, so for this cleaning solution, I just mixed hot water with purple power, but one thing that I did realize later on, especially I used it for the other valve cover, and you'll notice a difference. I used dishwashing soap, and that made a huge difference, and it cleaned the valve cover way better than purple power. So that's something to recommend, and I just use the basic dishwashing soap, nothing fancy or expensive. So for here, we're going to now remove the second part of the valve cover, and you can see there I'm using an Easy Red, which is a really cool ratcheting wrench. So, or I won't say ratcheting wrench, but just a ratchet. And this is glued onto the valve cover. So sometimes that glue can be hard to separate. So here again, I'm using my crowbar, but I would highly recommend using plastic or wood to separate the two parts, because once again, it can chip. So that's the last thing you want, is to have a chipped valve cover. Here you can see I'm using the hard plastic, and it did separate. So that was really cool. And it just goes to show that the hard plastic does work. You just gotta work with it. So there you can see there's some old silicone there that we will use later, and so that's very important. And as you can see, it's just super dirty, and so there's actually a little breather hole in there. And the thing is, the hole is so small that it gets clogged up, and I'm going to show you later what that hole looks like. If anybody out there has ever tried drilling out that hole to a bigger size so that it doesn't get clogged up, let me know. Let me know in the comments if it's changed the performance of the car or anything like that. Okay, so here I'm using a wire brush. I'm actually using the brass wire brush, and later I switched to a steel wire brush, and just kind of really just getting all that grime off and really getting into the channels. Okay, so here I have a new ultrasonic tank. If you've seen the video where I try to save my old ultrasonic tank, then yeah, it sadly it came back to life for a little bit, then it died. So now I have a new one, and it's really awesome. Same trick applies. I used purple power, but dishwashing soap actually works better. So that's something to keep in mind if you have an ultrasonic tank. And heat is key. So you want to get that water really hot. And so now you can see all that dirt that just kind of separated from the valve cover small part. I'm not sure what to call it. I know I've seen a name for it, but just know that it's just that add-on piece that goes to the valve cover. The valve cover, we'll call it the valve cover attachment. How about that? So okay, now we're back with the main valve cover, and now I'm using a stainless steel brush, and you know, I'm just really, this is the most time-consuming part of the whole procedure. So this is entirely up to you, how much time you want to spend cleaning your valve cover. And you know, so if you have a lot of time to spare, I would really go into great detail on cleaning the valve cover, even though you're not going to see it, but it's just peace of mind. And now I'm removing the rubber piece that holds the air intake, and it just allows me to get into those like tight corners. And so here, just kind of sped things up, obviously, so just to save time. I know this is a really long video, and I tried my best to shorten it, but I really also want to make sure that you guys know how to do this, because this is something that, you know, can easily go wrong if you know, steps are missed or not covered well. So as you can see, that's what the small attachment looks like after the ultrasonic tank. It's super clean, and I also change the fluid, or change the cleaning solution, which is something that you probably want to do often. And as you can see, I am using a plastic container that I bought at Walmart, so you don't need a fancy parts cleaning solution tank or anything like that, although those things are super cool and I wish I had one. But I just also want to show you that it can be done without that. So that's the main reason that I chose to go this path, because heavy duty solution cleaning tank is not for everybody, and not everybody can fit one of those in their garage. So as you can see here, it's getting cleaner, and I'm just cleaning out those channels, and that's really important because that's where your valve cover gasket is going to sit. So you want to really make sure that you clean that out, and make sure that there's a good surface so that oil does not leak through that gasket, and then you end up blaming the gasket manufacturer when really just needed to clean the channels out. Now, okay, here, remember that hole that I was telling you about? See, that's the hole right there. And over time, there's so much sludge that builds up that hole gets completely blocked. So again, if you guys have drilled that hole out to make it bigger, let me know what has happened. Has it made a difference in engine performance, gas mileage, anything like that? Let me know. I'd be happy to hear your advice on that, because that's something that I thought about. I really thought about drilling that hole out just so that oil wouldn't build up. Also, another thing you can do is just every oil change, just unplug that hose and take a paper clip and poke it through, just so that hole is always open. So now we pretty much have a clean valve cover, and now it's time to apply the silicone. So that's the silicone that I use. I've used it in the past, and it works great. It holds a great seal, and so I'm using alcohol to clean the surface because I want that surface super clean and also super dry. So take your time with this process. This is very important because you want to make sure that that silicone is mated properly to the valve cover on both sides. So here I'm cleaning, and also you want to take a wire brush as well and clean every little nook and cranny on the attachment. So here I'm just kind of sitting it down. Now this part, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I just thought I'd kind of show just how to set it up in case you were wondering. So you're going to poke a hole through the metal film, attach the needle nose applicator, I guess you could say, and then you're going to take that like sardine looking thing and just attach it at the bottom, and really that is just to kind of keep it pushed up. Now what I used here was like the stack of dimes technique. It's kind of popular in TIG welding, and it just makes sure that I get the silicone in without any air gaps. That was the main thing. So you don't want air gaps and then later find out that you didn't apply enough silicone, but at the same time you don't want to apply too much silicone. So it's kind of a delicate process, but as long as it's just not kind of overflowing and just getting out of control, you'll be fine, because remember that that silicone is going to expand out, and you don't want it to kind of expand so much that it drips and then falls into the engine and gets stuck somewhere and causes a blockage. So just a light application should be fine. So the stack of dimes is a good, I guess, baseline for getting it right. And then now when it comes to reusing these bolts, these two bolts for the valve cover, the addition piece, you do not want to reuse these bolts because they're made out of aluminum and they're one-time use bolts, and they will break. Even at 4 Newton meters, which is like nothing, they will start to strip and they can possibly break. And then that 1 hour valve cover gasket job is going to turn into like 3 hours. And yeah, the family is going to be on your case because everybody wanted to go to Disneyland or Disney World and they couldn't because you spent 3 hours on a 1 hour job. So here we go. Now we're just placing the new valve cover gasket into the valve cover, into those channels that are super clean, and we're just making sure that everything lays flat. And now we're going to take our valve cover with our valve cover gasket and we're going to mate it back to the engine. So carefully remove that plastic just in case any dust or dirt fell on it in the process. You don't want to spill that dirt onto the engine. Now this part we're just going to be super careful and just make sure that we line everything up and take our time. It's no rush here. We want to make sure that that valve cover gasket doesn't fall out, which it shouldn't. If you have a good valve cover gasket and it's the right kind, it shouldn't fall out. Some people even say get the OEM version because it's a little thicker, but that I know is not the OEM version, and it would work just fine. So probably soaking it in hot water, the rubber was able to expand, and so everything worked out fine. Now we're going to go ahead and put our bolts back in. Once again, just taking our time. And for tightening down the valve cover, we're just pretty much going to start in the center and then kind of work our way outward. That was really the method that I used, was just starting in the center, then kind of working outward. But if you have a tried and true method for valve covers, then go ahead and use your method. But this is what worked for me, and I haven't had any leaks. So here I'm just obviously going to speed this up, and now we're just going to torque it down. And so it's just going to be the same process. We're going to torque it down in the starting from the center and then kind of working our way outwards. And then also you want to just, after everything's torqued down, go ahead and make sure that it's a double check to make sure everything's torqued down again, because sometimes a certain section can be tighter than the other, and that can cause a leak. So you really want to kind of just double check with something like this to make sure that the valve cover is on tight. And I did not speed this portion up because I want you guys to just really see how this procedure is done, just how I went about torquing this valve cover, so that you'll have a clear idea on how to torque it down and how to tighten it down. So just bear with me here on this part. I guess while we're going through this part, I can ask you guys some questions. So in terms of just engine performance, has anyone changed out the headers, the exhaust manifold? Also, you see all the oil that is spilled onto the exhaust manifold? Wipe that up. You'll see I'm going to wipe it up later, but that's something that you definitely want to wipe up, because the whole reason that you probably changed your valve cover gasket was because you started smelling oil in your cabin. And what my story was, this truck had passed me, and it was like an old truck, and I thought, oh man, that truck is just leaving like all its exhaust and it's flying in the car. And then I rolled up the windows, and even after the truck had was long gone, I was like, wow, I'm still in its exhaust trail. And then I realized that it was my car. And so I said, okay, the oil is leaking, that's burning oil. And from there, that's when I realized that I it was time to change the valve cover gasket. So even, clean it as much as possible. But even though you do clean it, you are going to have that burning smell for maybe a day or so. Depends on how long you drive the car and how often. So don't think that the valve cover gasket's leaking, although you do want to check. So maybe like after a day of running the car, run your finger behind the gasket or just along the valve cover edge and see if there's any leaks. But yeah, so going back to exhaust manifold, have you guys ever changed out your exhaust manifold? I know there's a company, I can't think of the name offhand, but they make like a 4-into-1 exhaust manifold, and it's supposed to give a lot of horsepower. So I've been thinking about purchasing their exhaust manifold, and I think it would be really cool to see how that works out on the car. So let me know what kind of performance modifications you guys have done to your engine, and how's it worked out for you. Okay, so we're pretty much done. I'm not torquing down the small bolts, the 4 Nm bolts. I'm still torquing down the valve cover bolts that connect to the engine, which are going to be 8 Nm. So I'll go ahead and make sure that that's listed for you, but it'll be 8 Nm, and you want to just make sure that it's all torqued down. And as you can see, I'm kind of double checking here just to make sure that everything is nice and tight. I didn't miss anything because with all these bolts, it is possible to miss something, and that can cause a leak. So we just want to make sure that we cover all our bases here, and we'll have a happy engine and happy passengers and a happy driver. So okay, so now there you go. You see I'm wiping up all that spilled oil right there. So something that you can even do before you even start is cover the exhaust manifold, cover the headers, and then that way it'll kind of save you that smell. Now I'm connecting the breather hose back on, and everything's good now. So now we're going to move on to the other side, which is the driver's side. And this side is a little bit more technical and a little bit more scary, but there's nothing to fear. So I'm going to guide you through the process. So in this part, we're just going to cut these zip ties here that holds the casing for some of the wiring and everything like that. So now for here, there's 2 clips, one on each side. So make sure you get both of those clips, and then you're going to use a flathead screwdriver, a thin flathead screwdriver. And you can see here I'm trying to pry it up to let you know that those clips are in place, and it will not come up unless you disengage those clips. So make sure you do that. And you can see I'm using a very kind of like skinny flathead screwdriver, and I'm just looking through to make sure that I'm getting all the clips here. So I'm kind of just letting you guys know out there that those clips are very sneaky. They're very sneaky clips, and you want to make sure you get all of them, because it's going to help a lot in terms of removing the valve cover for this side, for the driver's side. So take your time. You do not have to remove the whole plastic guard. I guess we'll call it the guard, because as you can see in the upper left hand corner, it wraps all the way around. So we don't need to remove the whole thing. We just need to disengage the clips on the driver's side. And just remember that right where my hand is, there's 2 clips. There's an extra clip. And as you can see, it will not come up unless you disengage that clip. So that's something to make sure that you get to. See, now you can see that I'm disengaging that clip right there, and then we'll get it up. So there we go. Now we have it up. And so what we're going after, what we're looking for, are those 2 hoses that connect to the valve cover. And those hoses on this side, for whatever reason, and it was just like this on, another Mercedes M13 engine, I guess you can say a S500 engine, they get super hard, and it's to the point where it's almost impossible to remove them unless you use like some kind of razor blade or something, and which is what I had to use. So yeah, so that's something that I would try using, the simplest tools possible, like a hose removal tool, and then after that, maybe like some kind of plastic pry tool. But it really just kind of came down to just using a razor blade, and you want to be careful with the razor blade so that you don't injure yourself or damage the valve cover. So as you can see here, trying to use the hose removal tool, but it does not work, and this didn't even work, my crowbar. So as you can see here, I'm using a razor blade, and the razor blade, it was sharp enough to get into the rubber, because the rubber just, it pretty much just turns rock hard. So there you can see, it just cracks off. It's not even rubber anymore. So from there, just kind of chip away at it. That's really the best thing you can kind of do, or that's what I end up having to do, is just kind of chip away at it. And be careful with chipping away hard rubber like this, because the screwdriver can slip and hit your finger and cut your finger open. So be careful. But as you can see, another chip, and then there I was able to use the hose clamps tool and remove it. And then on the other side, it was it's kind of connected to a two-way valve. So be careful, because you don't want to damage the other hose that's connected to that valve, the two-way connector. So once again, I had to use a razor blade and then use a screwdriver just to get this hose off. And yeah, so this is another tedious part, but as you can see, yeah, that hose was super solid, and you can see the crack right there. Okay, so now we're on to the next hose, and this hose actually connects to the MAF sensor slash intake port. And I've shown you a video on how to clean the MAF sensor. So this is what that hose connects to on the other end. And as you can see, it gets super hard. And that is actually the tool that I use to pry the hose off. And so it's okay for prying, but for the valve cover side, it's pretty hard. So as you can see, I kind of just speed everything up here, and that's the hose. So it's very important that you, when you do buy a valve cover gasket, to buy those two hoses, especially those two hoses. Here you can see I'm just kind of cleaning up the dirt, just making sure that it's clean. And now we're going to do the fuel. And here's the part that can be a little nerve-wracking, but we're going to just kind of depressurize the fuel, and if there's any fuel, it'll come out. But for me, there wasn't any fuel that came out. So, but there may be some for you. So that's kind of the method to depressurize the fuel system. And just go ahead and hit the little valve that's in the center. Right there, you'll see. And I just used a punch to kind of release, whatever pressure was in there. Next, we're going to take our 14 millimeter wrench. Actually, I got to double check. It might be 17, maybe 17 millimeter, but I will definitely let you know in the video. So now what we're going to do here is just put a rag under the fuel line, because fuel will come out, and there's no way around this. So fuel will come out. It's probably about half a cup of fuel, so it's not a lot of fuel, but you definitely don't want to be smoking, playing with fire, lighting fireworks, or anything like that. The method I used to catch the fuel was I just ran a rag through, and I just kept sliding it as the fuel was coming out so that it wouldn't saturate and drip. I was just trying to prevent it from dripping as much as possible. So, but yeah, I'd say about a half a cup max will come out. So not a whole lot, which is a good thing. And once again, I'm not going to speed this part up because I want to show you the procedure that I used, because this is a very important part in the video. And it's important that you don't spill fuel around the engine, because you don't want that fuel to kind of build a puddle and later something happens that you don't want. So we're just gonna take our time here, make sure that the fuel is all collected in the towel, and once it is, we can just go ahead and discard that towel. Now we can start removing the valve cover, and we're just going to repeat the same process pretty much. So as you can see, I just kind of sped things up. And for the fuel system, we also don't want any dirt to get into the fuel system, so I just cut a glove, and I cut the finger parts off of a glove, and I just slid them over the fuel openings, just so that we don't get any dirt or anything like that in there. And you can even take it a step further and put a zip tie over it to make sure that the rubber glove finger pieces, that they don't fall off. But yeah, so just make sure you cover those up. If you want, you can even just put like some tape over it, but make sure it's something like masking tape, because you don't want the adhesive to get inside the fuel line as well. So here, the valve cover was a lot easier to remove. I was just able to pull on the rubber pieces that hold the air intake, and the valve cover separated, so that was great. And you just want to take your time, again, be very, very gentle, because remember, we don't want any kind of dirt to fall into the engine. And we also want to make sure that we catch that valve cover gasket so that it doesn't move any dirt or bring any dirt off. And we're just going to be very delicate, make sure that we're just really keeping an eye on things. And there we go. So now we have the valve cover off and the engine is exposed, and we'll repeat the same process. We'll go ahead and clean everything. And as you can see there, more of that sludge. That valve cover gasket is pretty hard, and so that's what causes leaks. When the rubber gets hard, it doesn't want to seal anymore. And you can see the dirt that kind of just builds up. So we want to make sure that we prevent that. Okay, so now we're going to repeat the same process on the driver's side. We're going to put the plastic down, protect the engine, and then go and wash that valve cover. So let's go do that. Okay, so now we have a super clean valve cover, and now we're going to go ahead and attach that fuel line back together. So we want to make sure that that fuel male side is aligned with the female side, and then we want to just make sure that we don't cross thread that nut or anything like that. So here you can see that I'm just going to really double check. I'm going to back it out and just make sure that that nut is threaded properly and that everything's aligned, because that's important. And so what I used to torque down that nut was a crowfoot. That was the best thing for me. And pretty much I just went in and torqued it down. And the torque rating is 38 Newton meters. Here you can see I'm using heavy duty silicone for these vent hoses, which helps a lot for the installation. And remember, there's a right and a wrong way for these hoses to go in. So you'll know if they're in the wrong way because they just won't line up with the engine. They'll bulge out a little bit, and it's a little obvious. So just kind of pay attention to that, though, because it is possible to install them the wrong way. This vent hose especially, it's obvious if it's in the wrong way. It just won't line up with the plastic wire protector. So once you have everything connected, then we can move on to zip tying the plastic wire cover. So that's the next step, and we're going to just take that plastic piece right there, and that fits over the fuel rail, which connects the plastic wire protector to the fuel rail and everything like that. So we're just going to go ahead and fit that in, and then get our zip ties. And there's going to be 3 zip ties that we're going to use for reconnecting the plastic cover. So we're going to start with the biggest one, which connects to the wire loom cover. And we don't want to tighten that zip tie down all the way. We just want to thread it and get it started. So here you can see the 3 zip ties that I'm talking about. I'll point them out later. And we just want to slide that wire cover over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tighten the zip tie down. So here you can see the 3 zip ties up close. That's the small one. And then we'll have 2 medium-sized ones. And that one is the one that's going to tighten down the wire sleeve. So make sure that you do that after you slide the sleeve over. And for this clamp right here, it was a little tricky. I had to use a ice pick and kind of line everything up, and then I was able to thread in the nut by holding everything together with some needle nose pliers, and then I was able to tighten down that nut just like that. So that might be the method that you have to use, but if you have a better one, do so. And don't forget to attach your MAF sensor connector back to your MAF sensor so that your car starts and runs properly, and remove that glove, and go ahead and put the engine cover back on, and you're good to go. So thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. And be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.